Hi everyone, my name is Rajesh and in this video we are going to have a look at data migration as a concept. Now in one of our previous videos which talked about the implementation or support project phases, we have already seen that data migration is one of the phase in an implementation project. Now we will be first of all looking at why exactly the data migration is needed. So in most of the companies, ERP or at least the tier 1 ERP is not the first software that they will implement. Oracle or SAP or Microsoft Dynamics, these are not the ERPs that will be there in the business since day one. So obviously, when these ERPs are implemented, the business would already exist. They would be using some sort of smaller system, or maybe they would just be using the Excel sheets in order to maintain their accounts, in order to maintain their purchases records, sales records, and so on and so forth. And now, when the business has reached a particular level, they would now want to implement a tier 1 ERP to streamline or to regularize their business processes and to standardize their business operations. Now, at this stage, when the business is already existing, there would be some sort of open data that needs to be there in the new system, in this new tier 1 ERP system, right from the day it commences its operations. And that's where the data migration is needed. Now, the next point, what kind of data needs to be migrated? Broadly, the data that needs to be migrated can be classified into three different types. One, you can call it a setup data or configuration data. Second, you can call it a master data. And the third one, you can call it a transactional data. Now, what's the differentiation between all three? Firstly, the setup data or the configuration data. I'll take an example of a vendor invoice. Now, this organization which was already existing prior to implementation of this ERP, they had so many different purchase transactions. So they used to procure some goods, they used to procure some services, some expenses they used to incur. And for all of that, they used to get this vendor invoice. Now, in this vendor invoice, there used to be a payment term. So payment term is something like, okay, I have got the invoice today and I will need to pay this invoice after 30 days of the invoice date. That 30 days is a payment term. Now, there may be the different kinds of payment terms that the business might be using. And all of these payment terms need to be migrated to the new system. So this 30 days, 60 days, or let's say immediate, all of these are payment terms that need to be present in the new system in order to migrate the further data, or in order to, let's say, migrate the vendor invoices and so on and so forth. And that is where this type of data is called setup data. So this payment term is the example of a setup data for the financials as a business function. If we talk about the supply chain management, then there could be freight term. Or if we talk about the human capital management, then it could be the employee payroll components. It could be anything. So that is the example of setup data. Now, second is the master data. The prominent example for the master data would be the supplier master or the customer master or the bank's master and so on and so forth. Now, again, taking the example of financials or the accounts payable in particular, generally the large businesses would be dealing with the same suppliers again and again, and they would have the set terms and conditions with those suppliers. So obviously, whenever every invoice comes from that supplier and that every invoice is punched into the system, not everything will need to be recorded from scratch. And that is the reason why the supplier master is maintained. So all of these supplier details, like what is the bank account in which the money needs to be transferred to that supplier, or what is the payment term that the supplier provides us, or what is the address of the supplier from where the goods are received, from where the bills are received, or let's say what is the payment method with which you are going to pay to the supplier, for example check or wire transfer or what exactly. So all of these details are called master details, which are maintained on the supplier master. The reasons are two. One is, as I mentioned, the data entry convenience. So every time when you record an invoice that is received from that supplier, you need not enter all of these details again and again. They can be simply defaulted from this vendor master data. Another point is also the control and consistency. For example, if the address or the supplier name or the bank account name, all of these things need to be exactly standardized, then they need to be coming from one place where they are already entered one time. Because let's say if they are not coming from the supplier master, then every time when you are entering the invoices, or let's say when the different data entry operators are entering the invoices, they may enter these details differently, which is something that may cause issues in processing the payments for that particular supplier. So for all these reasons, that is control, data entry convenience, and consistency, these masters are typically maintained in the ERP systems. So vendor master or the supplier master, customer master, banks master, employee master, these are all the examples of the master data. And since the business is already running even before this ERP is coming into picture, there would be a lot of master data that would have been already created in that business, which also needs to be migrated to the new system. That is master data migration. Lastly, the transactional data migration. So what is transactional data? Again, taking the examples from the accounts payable function in the financials. Now, there would be hundreds of invoices that the organizations would be receiving every day from their vendors. Some of those invoices would obviously be outstanding or unpaid as on the date when the organization will start using this new ERP system. And that is where all such unpaid invoices, which are also called open invoices, they need to be transferred or they need to be migrated or created from fresh in the new ERP system. This is a classic example of a transactional data. What could be the transactional data in terms of other modules or other business functions? So for example, in the supply chain management, it could be open purchase orders, like the purchase orders that the organization has sent out to the suppliers, but it has not received the goods against those purchase orders. Or maybe it could be the sales orders on the sales side, like the orders that the organization has received from its customers, but which are not yet fulfilled. Or there could be open vendor invoices, open customer invoices, or let's say the open payrolls, like a particular payslip has been processed, but then it has not yet been paid. So any of this data is typically called transactional data. And when it comes to the accounting data, one of the major part of the transactional data is the open trial balance, because trial balance is the start from where all the financial statements would be built in the new system based on the new transactions that are recorded. However, for that, you need to have the opening balances in the books of account to be migrated in the new system, which is typically called a trial balance. So all of these are example of transactional data. So far we have seen why. First of all, why the data migration is needed. Secondly, we have also seen what. Like what exactly is migrated when it comes to the data migration to the new ERP system, which we saw are typically the three things: master data, setup data, and the transactional data. Now the last part, like how exactly this data is migrated. Now there could be different strategies that the service provider or the implementation partner or the system integrator would be actually taking when it comes to migrating all these different kinds of data. So the purpose of this video is not to discuss on those strategies, because then that discussion would become too technical. However, if we look at the broad steps in the data migration, then first of all, it would be the data extraction from the old system. So the old system that the client is using, or maybe it is just some Excel sheets, the data needs to be extracted from that system. Secondly, there would be the data cleansing, which is clearing the impurities from the data that is there in the old system. For example, one vendor might have been recorded with two different names in the old system. So it's the same vendor, but somehow it got recorded with two different names. Now one of them, which is a duplicate, needs to be deleted. This is a typical activity in the data cleansing. Now there could be n number of other impurities or other, let's say, changes that may need to be done in the data. So all of that would come into the data cleansing. So the first step was the data extraction. Second thing is the data cleansing. Third thing is the data transforming. So if the organization is implementing any tier 1 ERP, for example, Oracle Cloud ERP or Microsoft Dynamics or SAP S4 HANA. So in all of these softwares, for all of these types of data, like the vendor master, the customer master, the bank master, trial balance, vendor invoices, customer invoices, payroll, purchase orders, for all of this data, there would be some set formats. there would be some fields that would be mandatorily required in order to create all of this data into the new system. So the data that is coming from the older system may not be in that exact same format. So it needs to be transformed in the required format for this new ERP. That is called data transformation. So the first thing was data extraction, second, data cleansing, third, data transformation, fourth would be data load, which is like actually loading this data into the new ERP system, which is the major part of the data migration. And fifth and last step would be the reconciliation. For example, you wanted to migrate, let's say 1000 records of a particular data, and when you actually uploaded the data, have all of those 1000 records got created in the new system or not. So reconciling what you wanted to create or what you wanted to migrate and what has actually been migrated. So the reconciliation between both of those is going to be the logical endpoint for the data migration. So just to summarize, we have seen in this video why, what, and how about the data migration. Why? Because ERP or the tier 1 ERP at least is not going to be the first system. So some sort of data will already be existing in the organization because organization is already running the business even before this system is getting implemented. So that's where the data migration is needed. So that is the answer to why. Second, what? There could be three types of data: configuration or setup data, master data, and transactional data that needs to be migrated. And third, how? There is a 5-step process: data extraction, data cleansing, data transformation, data load, and then data reconciliation. So that is the overall broader understanding about the data migration as a concept. Thank you everyone for watching this video. With the advent of cloud, the ERP solutions are becoming more and more affordable. And that's where even the small and mid-scale organizations are increasingly opting for ERP softwares. What it means for us is ERP consulting as a career option is now more lucrative than ever. So if you are a fresher finance, commerce, and management graduate and want to build your career in the ERP consulting industry, then go visit www.yourerpcoach.com and hit that inquire button right now.